2 weeks ago, I made a video called Why Do Instruments Transpose? And it was a great success. Thanks to all of you for your support on that. And if you haven't seen it, go check that one out before watching this one. Link will be in the pinned comment. However, from the comments, I got the sense that a few instruments felt left out, just a little bit. So I figured I should go back and address a couple of these. And I've even brought in some backup to help me out with some of the tougher questions. You've successfully bullied me into making a part 2. Congrats, so let's get into it. I mentioned the trumpet briefly in part 1, and I was gonna skip it for part 2. But then I got this comment, and I felt so bad that I haven't gotten a full night's sleep since. So this one is for you, What's Cooking Research. May God forgive me. The trumpet is similar in many ways to the French horn in its development. In the early days, it had no valves, which means that it was quite limited in the notes that it could play. The natural trumpet, as it was called, could only play the notes in the harmonic series of the fundamental that it was tuned to. A natural trumpet tuned to the key of C, just like a natural horn in C, could only play these notes. But the natural trumpet was even more limited because generally they do not use their first fundamental of the harmonic series. And they were unable to reach the front of their bell to adjust pitches. That's why this technique is called stopped horn and not stopped trumpet. In order for natural trumpets to play in keys outside of C, crooks had to be used. A crook was a piece of tubing that would lengthen or shorten the trumpet, which would change its fundamental. A trumpet with a D crook could play these notes. Natural trumpets would be expected to change crooks often, sometimes even in the middle of a piece. To make the players' lives easier, natural trumpet music was always written in the key of C, regardless of what key they were actually playing in, meaning that the same notes on the page would always represent the same partial, regardless of the actual notes coming out of their bell. The trumpet became chromatic before the horn did, with the invention of the keyed trumpet in the 1790s, which is the instrument that the Haydn Trumpet Concerto is written for. But the natural trumpet was still widely used until at least the 1840s, with Wagner's The Flying Dutchman still including natural trumpet parts in 1843. But even now, with fully chromatic trumpets, we still transpose. Why? There's two main reasons. The first is that all of the rep that was written for the natural trumpets up until the 1840s is still notated in those crooked keys. In order to read those parts the way that they are written now, you have to transpose. And the second is that transposing allows for players to play across multiple trumpets in different keys with the same fingering. Different trumpets in different keys have different preferred ranges that are more comfortable, as well as different timbres. An E-flat trumpet will be much more comfortable playing high than one in B-flat. Not to say that pros couldn't do it either way, but it would be easier on the E-flat. And transposition allows these players to use the same fingerings across these different versions of the trumpet. Just like the clarinet example from the last video, the trumpet player's fingerings are always in the same key, regardless of what notes are actually coming out of the end of their bell, making it much easier to switch between instruments. Alright, What's Cooking Research? I hope I did you some justice here. Oh, and don't forget about the cornet. If I don't mention it, I'll get roasted. Here's the saxophone. The saxes also felt very left out. I can't believe it either. Now the saxophone is a little different from the other woodwinds. The clarinet, for example, started transposing because the early version of the instruments could not comfortably play in all keys. Different pitched clarinets were needed to cover all the different keys, and transposition allowed the players to switch between these instruments in different keys by keeping their fingerings the same. The sax, however, being invented much later than the clarinet, with it being patented in 1846, was fully chromatic from the beginning, and it could already play in any key. The first groups of saxes that were invented contained 2 families of 7 instruments each, so a total of 14 different saxes. One family was in the keys of C and F, which would have made transposition unnecessary for at least a few instruments, and the other family was in the keys of B-flat and E-flat. The players and composers at the time chose the family of B-flat and E-flat to be the dominant one, so you kind of brought this on yourselves. But regardless of what key they were in, the reason that there was so many different versions of the sax was because they wanted it to cover as large of a musical range as possible, as well as have access to a variety of different timbres. The saxes in the beginning had a range of 2 octaves plus a third, which wasn't bad, but in order to get the full orchestral range, 7 different instruments of different sizes had to be produced. And in order for one player to be proficient at every saxophone in the family, transposition is almost necessary. Every instrument in the saxophone family reads the same notes in the same treble clef and uses the same fingerings for those notes. The only thing that changes is the note that pops out. For example, the written C of the E-flat alto sax looks the same and is fingered the same as the written C of the E-flat baritone sax, but what pops out is completely different. If the sax did not transpose, players would have to learn new fingering systems and read different clefs for each version of the instrument, making changing between them much more difficult. But wait, I know what you're about to say. I'm about to hear from another very vocal instrument group about how they don't transpose and have to do the very thing that the saxophone is avoiding. The recorder family is one of those groups that doesn't transpose, that in my opinion, maybe they should consider it. But to be honest, I know very little about the recorder, so I brought on someone who does. Jolaine is a member of the audience that spoke up for Team Recorder in the last video, so let's hear what she has to say on the topic. I got a lot of pushback from two main groups of instruments on that video. And the two main groups were low brass players and recorders. The main reason that these two groups pushed back, it seems, is that they don't transpose.
I was going to say you got a lot of pushback. I think the recorder gets a lot of grief because, for one thing, a lot of people have never heard anything other than a classroom full of third graders play one. You really don't commonly hear Lucy Horsch playing, Bach unless you're going out looking for it. So, recorder players recorders get made fun of a lot.
Yeah.
And so we do tend to push back a little when something comes up.
Is the recorder the viola of the woodwind family?
No, worse than that.
In your opinion or your experience, why does the recorder not transpose like many of the other woodwind instruments?
Well, I think it has to do with its age. I mean, it's one of the oldest instruments there are. In the Renaissance, music was mostly written for voices and consorts of instruments that were tuned to kind of match the human voice. And so from the start, you were expected to play all those instruments and with all the different fingerings. Because musicians were, in that era, consort musicians, you were expected to play them all.
So transposition really wasn't a thing in the Renaissance.
Oh, yeah.
What are the advantages and disadvantages of the fact that the recorder doesn't transpose? From my perspective, I'm a string player, so I don't really have to worry about it a whole lot. But I would think that if I can pick up a clarinet in A and a clarinet in B flat, and I can use the same fingerings across those two instruments, that is a huge advantage for me being able to learn things quickly and being able to switch instruments quickly. The advantage of not transposing, I'm not quite sure what that is for the player's perspective. I can see why that would be useful to everybody else in the ensemble, but the advantage from the recorder player's perspective, is there one?
I think so. And I don't think it's as hard to learn another fingering as people think. And once you have it, you have it. It's like second nature to me.
Okay.
To play the different fingerings. And in our ensembles, we're passing instruments around. I'm taking the great bass. Now I've got a soprano in my hands. Now I've got a sopranina in my hands. And I prepared a little demonstration for you. So I have an etude here written by Siegfried Karg-Ellert. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. So this would be early 20th century. Okay. And it was originally written for an oboe. But this is in a book of tunes arranged, or the original was in E minor. This one is changed into A minor, so it fits better on a C recorder.
Okay. So
I have a tenor here, which is a C. So if I play it the way it has been transposed for me, so I can play it on a C recorder. The original was in E minor. If I want to play it in E minor, I just pretend like I have an alto in my hands and use the F fingerings. Or I can play it in G minor and use D fingerings, or I can play it in D minor and use G fingerings.
Okay, so maybe because of your experience having to learn all of these different fingerings, it might be more challenging in the beginning, but then once you have mastery of it, you're able to transpose probably much more fluidly.
And I don't even think of it as transposing. Okay, I can play it in alto fingerings and get another key. But I have a friend who's a clarinet player, and he's quite frustrated trying to, jam with a bunch of folks at a party that are trying to play waltzes for people to dance because he can't transpose in his head fast enough.
Yeah.
But I kind of tried to talk to him about, well, there is a fingering system that you could use that would give you the original notes. I'm not a clarinet player, although I played it in high school and college. I haven't played it in decades. That would give you, the true note, not the transposed note. But it's hard for people to wrap their heads around. There is another fingering. I mean, they think of it as, oh, I need to transpose it, up a step or something like. And I'm like, there's a fingering system that would give you that. And it's not as hard to learn as you might think it would be to learn a new fingering system. Having said that, your basic alto F in recorder in F, that's the Baroque instrument, is much more comfortable in flat keys, and the D instrument's much more comfortable in C, in sharp keys. They're both fully chromatic, and I could play anything on either one of them, but one of them's just going to be much more comfortable and much better fit than the other.
Well, I think that's pretty much true for any instrument. I mean, strings love the key of D major, but D flat major is just not. I mean, we can do it, but it's not fun.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Same thing. What I picked up on in your video is you saying it was a problem for people to switch from one instrument to the next in different keys, and the transposing addressed that problem. And I mean, I get it, right? But I don't think it's as hard as people think it is to learn another fingering. And I just, we're an example. We do it all the time.
I guess the main thing for me is, just being able to switch back and forth consistently. And then I'm thinking of something like a musical pit. Played in quite a few. And for us, I mean, we have to switch between upright and electric bass quite a bit. And that's stressful enough on its own. But I see these woodwind players that play oboe, clarinet, saxophone, and flute, and that is their part. And they're playing 4 instruments throughout the time that they're there. And then sometimes they're playing E-flat clarinet, sometimes they're playing B-flat clarinet. And just for me, like, I would think that has to be so stressful. So I just imagine like anything that you could do to make either fingering across instruments easier or fingering in the instrument family easier. I think, in my opinion, that's why it was done. But I can see the advantage from the other side once you do master it. I feel like the learning curve is probably much higher to learn different fingerings, but once you get there, I mean, you might have, I'm sure you're much better at transposing than I'll ever be because of that. You know what I mean?
Well, when I play in a concert, I could easily have 12 to 15 instruments lying beside me.
Well, there you go.
That I play.
I could not imagine that.
I mean, that's what we do.
Yeah. There is one more group of instruments that felt left out of the discussion as well, and that's the low brass. So I brought some backup for that as well. Nick is a longtime friend of mine, and if you know the lore, we used to play in a death metal band together. And he helps me do some work for this channel. He was also a trombone major and can give us some insight into the trombone's lack of transposition. Why, in your opinion, does the trombone not transpose?
Largely, it is because of the historical origins. I mean, the trombone evolved from a previous instrument, the sackbut, in the mid 15th century, and these early slide instruments are chromatic by design. That's one reason. So you didn't need to change crooks or anything, but also in a practical sense, I mean, trombones were used in that time period mostly for sacred music, church settings, and even composers like Bach at the time would use trombone parts to reinforce vocal lines. This was typically done like in his cantatas. For the sake of writing, I mean, I would probably believe it just made sense to keep it all in concert pitch.
Okay. So the trombone is pitched in B flat, which means the fundamental note when you have your slide pulled all the way in and you play, that note is going to be a B flat, correct?
Yeah, so that means trombone is organized based on like the B flat harmonic series, right? So your fundamental is B flat, and then from there you're going to go up a fifth to F back up to B flat, and then to a third D, F again. And then so it goes through the harmonic series with B flat being the fundamental. An open position would be first position with the slide all the way in. That gives you your B flat fundamental.
So then my question is, so when the trombone has a fundamental of B flat, it doesn't transpose. But when a trumpet has a fundamental of B flat, the B flat trumpet, it does transpose. Any insight as to why?
Again, probably historical. I mean, there are many different trumpets. A big reason that transposing was, supported is because of the commonality between fingerings, right? So
Yeah.
the fingerings are the same on a B flat trumpet, a C trumpet, an A trumpet. However, what you're hearing is not going to be the same. But this way, as a player, you don't have to learn a whole new series of fingerings when you're switching these instruments. Something like the trombone, who from the start has the ability to play chromatically. I mean,
yeah, it wasn't necessary because we didn't need 5 different versions of the trombone from the beginning.
Right.
Okay. Why does the trombone not transpose when playing the alto trombone? Even though it's pitched in E flat and reads the alto clef. Seems to me that it would be much easier to switch between the instruments if it was transposing.
Yeah, so there's two reasons that stick out to me. First of all, even though your fundamental is E flat, the slide technique mechanically still works the same way as a tenor trombone, right? Your half steps are still one position apart. You're still operating on that same harmonic series, fundamental, fifth, third, fifth, so on. So using that kind of slide logic, it's pretty easy for somebody who is comfortable on the trombone to get the tenor trombone to get around on that instrument, the alto trombone as well. With that being said, for the composer's sake, they can keep writing at concert pitch. I would say that another reason is because there's not too many people out there who spend most of their time on alto trombone, right? A lot of alto trombone parts are played by people who mainly spend their time on a tenor trombone, who have an alto trombone, pull it out when required, play those parts. But if you don't have a alto trombone, you can play an alto trombone part on a tenor trombone. So like I'm thinking back to my time in college with my trombone professor, we would read through alto trombone etudes on our tenor trombones.
Then the alto trombone is more useful for just making the ranges more comfortable, but it could be done on a tenor. What are the advantages and disadvantages to the trombone not transposing? I imagine switching between the instruments is more difficult, but I can see the benefit from the composer conductor side that the trombone is always in concert pitch, but it seems like it'd be more difficult for the players. What do you think?
I think that there are a lot of advantages for the trombone, reading in concert pitch. I would say really in most musical settings, it is, in my opinion at least, that reading, playing, thinking in concert pitch is an advantage because it's universal, right? I mean, so that alone, and especially from just player's perspective, from if you're analyzing a piece from that perspective, like having that concert pitch brain is great. I would say that trombone players, because of the versatility of their instrument, were very fluent in clefs, right? As a trombone player, it's expected that you know how to read bass, tenor, alto, treble, right? And you're able to read in those clefs, perform them on your instrument. I think trombone players being fluent in multiple clefs is an advantage because from an educational standpoint, when I have students who are trumpet players and I have my trombone, I can read their parts with them if I'm reading the music in tenor clef and they're reading their regular trumpet music. So I can read down on trombone trumpet parts if I read them in tenor clef and add 2 flats. The same's true for saxophone parts, E flat saxophone parts. So they could be either alto or bari. If I have a student who's a bari sax player, I can read that E flat part down as if it were in bass clef and just add 3 flats.
So this is something that I noticed with the recorder players as well, is that because they read in concert pitch and because they're expected to switch keys so much, the learning curve might be higher in the beginning, but you start to master transposition maybe in a way that somebody that relies on it constantly wouldn't. Because what you're describing, I don't think I could do that being a string player. I mean, we play in bass clef, tenor clef, and treble clef as well. When I'm teaching lessons, I'm never having to learn these tricks that you're talking about. But it seems like because you have the experience of playing across instruments and playing across many clefs, that you're able to transpose in a way I bet a lot of people can't. So that might be an advantage And that's very similar to the recorder player that I was talking to. She was able to do things with transpositions and clefs that blew my mind, to be honest. So the trombone is accounted for, but that leaves out the tuba. Why does the tuba not transpose? Well, in some instances, the low brass in general does transpose, such as the brass band. I would recommend Trent Hamilton's YouTube channel to learn more about this. But in the orchestral world, the tuba does not transpose, and to be honest, I haven't got a great answer as to why. In this video series, I've tried to avoid answering the question, why does this instrument transpose/not transpose, with the answer that it's just tradition, or that's just how it is. But for the tuba, I can't really seem to find a better answer. The tuba is not as old as the recorder, and it was not originally played as a consort instrument in the Renaissance like the recorder was, so that can't really be the answer. I've heard that it's just tradition that bass clef instruments don't transpose, which seems to be true for the brass, but as I mentioned before, my instrument, the bass, transposes at the octave. The tuba plays in various keys such as B flat, C, E flat, and F, and for every one of those keys, they have to learn a different fingering system. These different keys exist for different playing situations and range considerations, but as to why they can't transpose to easily switch between them, I don't have a great answer for. Perhaps Nick's answer of just having the bass think in concert pitch is just helpful to everyone, and that could be it, but I think there's more to it. I've tried to reach out to a few tuba players, but didn't receive a response. But if you play the tuba and have a concrete answer to this question, why does the tuba not transpose, even though that means they have to learn a new fingering for every different key of tuba that they play in? Leave it in the comments and I will pin it so that everyone can see it. If you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon. Thanks.